And it's time for the uncancelled interview with Ben Habib. And Ben was actually a guest on the first ever Outspoken Live the day after the UK election when he was still deputy leader to Nigel Farage of Reform UK. Now, you'll probably know he's since lost that job, sparking outrage among his diehard followers who believe his common sense approach to wokery, multiculturalism and the economy is desperately needed in Westminster. But today, rather than playing political parlour games, this is actually an opportunity to go in depth with the successful businessman to find out how he thinks Britain can be saved. And Ben Habib, it is an absolute pleasure to have you today. But I really want to start with this breaking news, Ben, which is the video ricocheting around the internet of the new US vice presidential candidate JD Vance suggesting, half jokingly, that the UK could become the world's first Islamist nuclear power. I played it in my digest, but let's have another look.
By the way, I have to beat up on the UK just one additional thing. I was talking with a friend recently, and we were talking about, one of the big dangers in the world, of course, is nuclear proliferation, though, of course, the Biden administration doesn't care about it. And I was talking about, what is the first truly Islamist country that will get a nuclear weapon? And we were like, maybe it's Iran, maybe Pakistan already kind of counts. And then we sort of finally decided maybe it's actually the UK, since Labour just took over. But to my Tory friends, I have to say, you guys have got to get a handle on this. But
now, Ben, look, I know he was joking, right? But he has been immediately lambasted as racist and dangerous. So isn't there a really serious point here that we seem completely unable to discuss demographic change unless you're prepared to become sort of a devil-like figure in the corrupt British mainstream media?
So I think he was obviously using satire to make a point. By the way, very good to be on the show, Ben.
Thank you, Ben. Great to have you back.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for having me. He was using satire to drive the point home. And I think it's a very serious point. And the way I take the point is that the United Kingdom, having really expunged sectarianism from its politics pretty much, even in Northern Ireland, we settled the position. There are still big debates that take place, but sectarianism had gone out of British politics, and now it's back with a vengeance. And we see it being given succor by Keir Starmer. And I will not forget Keir Starmer addressing, on Armistice Day, those who come to celebrate and mourn our military who died to protect this country, with his poppy proudly on, then going to a gathering of Muslims later that afternoon with his poppy off. And that sends a number of signals. The first is that there's a difference between those who attended the cenotaph and those who were in the Muslim gathering, a difference in their attitude to the United Kingdom and what it means to be British, because how can you be British irrespective of your religion and somehow be ashamed of the poppy? Not everyone needs to wear a poppy. You don't need to, I'm not into big virtue signaling. But the fact that Keir Starmer recognized he had to take it off sends a big signal about what's going on in our domestic politics. And we've seen that in this recent election, with 4 or 5 MPs being elected because of their view on Gaza, not because of their view on British domestic policy, which is what elections should be fought on, not on what's happening in a war over which we have close to zero influence. And of course, Gaza is not just about Gaza. It's about that soft or increasingly hard Muslim vote. It's garnering votes from the Muslim community based on the fact that it is Muslim. So sectarianism is back in the UK. And I think that's what he was basically identifying. And we need to be very careful about it, very careful.
And is there an issue just with the numbers, Ben? If you look back, the Muslim population used to be a tiny percentage of the UK. And actually, if we continue on this growth path, there could be 34 million Muslims in the UK. But by the 2050s, or does that not matter?
No, of course it matters. I mean, the way that the demography is changing matters. But here's something which is remarkable. And if you bear with me, it takes a bit of explaining, but if you bear with me. So diversity, equality and inclusion is the government's policy ostensibly put in place to protect and promote minority rights, including principally ethnic minorities. And that's all well and good. But the way diversity, equality, and inclusion has come to be practiced is through the promotion of those ethnic minorities, religious minorities, and so on, to the detriment of the majority. And all ethnic minorities, minor religions, sexual preferences, whatever, have been lumped into this DEI bracket, and they're all promoted equally, and the majority is ignored. So DEI, those who benefit from DEI policies, are in a special place, or collectively they're in a special place in the British economic, cultural, and legislative structure. Now, when you put 4 million Muslims, 200,000 Jews, a number of gay people, a number of transgender people who are very, very small in number, all in one grouping, and you separate them, it is the largest grouping in that subset that is going to dominate. And so the Muslim vote, if you like, the Muslim category that's protected, promoted, and celebrated by DEI actually is now dominating all minority groups. And because it's protected by virtue of being in DEI, it actually has become unassailable. So even though the population of Muslims in this country, but by the way, I've got nothing against Muslims, please don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But even though the population of Muslims in this country is only 4 million, because they're in this protected category, and because they're the biggest component of that protected category, they are now having a disproportionate impact on discourse in this country and the way that this country behaves politically and culturally and in other spheres. Islam is coming to have a very dominant effect in the United Kingdom. And that's because it is the biggest majority in the minority. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense. And look, of course, it goes without saying that we can have a conversation like this without needing to justify that we have no issue with individual Muslims. But so often, Ben, when folk do have conversations like this, the Islamophobic word is used. And I just want to raise a point that I spoke about earlier because I'm interested in your view. So when people say that I could be Islamophobic, can I respond and say, well, I'm incredibly worried about the fact that every single piece of polling that is done on this issue shows that over 50% of Muslim people in the UK are homophobic and have zero tolerance for homosexuals, which obviously I am. Can a woman say that they have huge concerns about the fact that they are pushed out of leadership positions in the Muslim world, and that there is the increasing introduction in some parts of the UK of Sharia law by the back door? Are we allowed to say that without being accused of Islamophobia?
So this is partly related to what I've just been saying, which is that DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion, places all Muslims in this special category and makes them virtually immune, like all the other categories within DEI, immune from criticism and being challenged, because DEI exists in order to celebrate and promote their interests. And because they're the largest group, they get celebrated and promoted the most, and they become unassailable and unquestionable. And I just declare something straight away. My dad's Punjabi. My dad is a Muslim. He's a non-practicing Muslim, but he is a Muslim. I have lots of Muslim friends, but they're not the ones at issue. It's the minority extreme Muslims, if you like. And I think we need to look very carefully at what Islam is, because Islam is not one religion. It's not a settled religion right across the board. You have Sufis, you have Shias, you have Sunnis, you have Wahhabis, and you have different forms of Islam. And if you look at the Middle East itself is riven with division over Islam. Islam is not a settled, unified religion. And it is the more extremist elements in this country which have been given all the same protection as the completely moderate, perfectly reasonable human beings with whom we're accustomed to rubbing shoulders. And you're absolutely right, if I may say so, that Sharia law is being practiced. It's tolerated in this country. It is fine for Sharia law to be applied as long as it doesn't conflict with British law. But actually, only one form of law should apply in the United Kingdom, and that is British law. And we lose sight of what's important in the United Kingdom if we start giving succor to different forms of legislation, even if that's because our own legislation doesn't provide for anything specific in that regard. And just on the point of Islamophobia, and this really gets me down, it's the way language is so often used to... I've got two more points to make. The first is on how language is used to shut down debate. The word phobia means an irrational fear. So when you put Islam and phobia together, you're saying it's irrational to have a debate about Islam. Many Muslim scholars want to debate Islam. They want to debate what it is that the different tenets of Islam hold to be true, and which ones should be given more succor to, which ones should be promoted, which ones should be debated more aggressively. Muslims want to have that debate, but we're not allowed to have that debate because of the word Islamophobia, because all Muslims are put together in one category and protected under this altar of DEI. And the last thing I want to say is that we see how this plays out in the United Kingdom, because it gives people like Sadiq Khan cover to say at least 40% of the Met should be from ethnic minorities, which, if you turn it on its head, would be the equivalent of a white person saying, a white Christian person saying, 60% of the Met should be white and Christian. And if a white person were to say that, they would be cancelled. Perhaps the only place that they would have free reign to speak would be on your channel. But Sadiq Khan can get away with saying at least 40% of the Met should be from an ethnic minority because he's got this protected status. And we are damaging the fabric of our society. The schisms in the United Kingdom are coming, in my view, because of the celebration, embedding, promotion, championing of minority ethnicities and so on, over and above to the detriment of our own culture. Sorry, there's one more thing, Dan. Forgive me. There's one more thing I want to say. On the Palestinian marches, you will often see lesbians for Palestine, and you will see
queers for Palestine.
Queers for Palestine. And I've tried to rationalize that because I thought to myself, these people can't be completely daft. They must know that if they were to go and live in Gaza, the first
you'd have your head chopped off and be thrown off at the top of a building.
Absolutely. Hamas would have no tolerance for you. But I think it's because they're in association through DEI that they somehow see it as acceptable to go and march, because Palestine is a minority issue. So if you're a minority lesbian and you're really not very bright, you think, well, I'll get on that bandwagon and I'll champion that minority issue. But as you rightly say, you will be given no truck. I went to speak to the Jewish community in North London a few weeks ago. And I explained to them how DEI was working against the Jewish community, and they couldn't see it. They thought the Jewish community were being protected by DEI because they're a minority religious belief, they're a minority race in the United Kingdom, and DEI protects them. But it doesn't. It only protects the biggest component within that minority definition. I'm sorry, I've labored the point, but I think it's really important to try and understand how it is.
It is incredibly important. I guess the only thing that I might disagree with you on is you talk about the extremist minority. But I guess by raising those opinion polls, I just wanted to make the point that actually it's not always an extremist minority. The majority of Muslims do not believe homosexuals should exist in the UK. The majority of Muslims do not believe that women should take on leadership roles. So that's just the one area where I sometimes question, it's not always just the extremist minority here. It's very often the overwhelming
There are some basic beliefs, pillars, which are problematic.
Exactly. And we saw that clip before the election of Angela Rayner begging for the Muslim vote in a room completely full of men. So there are lots of issues there. But look, can I ask you about this personally? Because I do wonder if you find it easier to have these discussions as a non-white man. And can you talk a little bit about how you got here. What was your political path to be able to have the bravery of these sorts of conversations, given that actually, Ben, you didn't need to, you're a very successful businessman, there was no onus on you to enter this highly controversial and divisive political arena?
So, just a bit of background on me, Dan, so it's clear for viewers. My dad's Punjabi and Pakistani. My mother is British, blonde and blue-eyed, or she was blonde before she went grey, but she was blonde, blue-eyed, and born in Isleworth. And her father fought in the Somme, and my paternal grandfather actually grew up on a farm. He had a very humble, very genuinely humble, background in Pakistan. So I am half Pakistani by ethnic origin and half British. And I'm very proud of my Pakistani background, but I am British through and through. I feel British. I think, as any true British citizen would think, which is with pride about my country, pride about the contribution this country has made to the world, and so on. And what I've seen in my political journey, amongst many other things, is an antipathy, a shame, by British citizens of their own past, of their own history, how it is that we came to be what we are today as a nation, a preparedness and even a desire to smother that of which we should be so protective, which is British culture, British history, British values, which, remember, we are the country that at the zenith of its power abolished the slave trade. We're the country that had the agrarian revolution started here, the industrial revolution started here. Many of the great advances in science and everything else was made in the United Kingdom because of British culture, promotion of diversity of thought, and so on. And all of that is being hijacked on the altar of the promotion of these minority interests and so on. When you promote a minority over and above and to the detriment of the majority, one, you shut down honest debate, as we've just discussed. So diversity of thought goes straight out of the window. You have to bow down to these other cultures and accept those other cultures for what they are, because that is part of celebrating them. So that's the first thing. Debate goes out of the window. The second thing that goes out of the window is economic prosperity, because you cease to recruit and promote those people who are the best at the jobs that you wish them to do, and you start doing it based on the color of their skin and whatever they might believe, etc. And we saw this with the RAF. We see it. They spent £1.7 million trying to recruit ethnic minority jet fighter pilots. They weren't interested in getting white guys. I mean, who cares what color your jet fighter pilot is? You want someone who can fly a jet, and do it the best that they can do it. And so for me, all of this is symptomatic of a country that will be eviscerated if we don't get a grip of it. It's very serious. The Tories brush it off as it's a culture war. Don't be so pathetic. Don't be so childish. It's your culture. It goes to the heart of the existence of the nation state of the United Kingdom. The definition of a nation state, a definition of a society, includes having a settled culture. And we are trashing our culture, and we're trashing it through hijacking the language, hijacking our history, promoting foreign cultures over and above and to the detriment of our own culture, and so on and so forth. And so in my political journey, it's been a revelation that this is how it's taking place. And I'm very lucky because I am brown and I can say the things I've just said without, I hope, getting cancelled. And therefore I see it more as my duty, Dan, to speak up, because I've got some protection. I'm afforded protection through the same DEI policy that therefore allows me to speak up. And I'm therefore obliged to speak up volubly because I have the ability to do it.
Absolutely. And look, I totally agree that the Conservative Party have allowed this to happen over the past 14 years, which is ludicrous, and it could kill their party. I am pretty confident, actually, and I know a lot can change in 5 years, but I'm pretty confident that there's a strong chance of a Prime Minister Farage in 2029, because you look at the direction of travel, for example, with Le Pen in France, and the same thing has happened with the Reform UK movement here. But, and this is a big but, it's going to get so much worse, Ben, over the next 5 years under this Labour government. So what is your prescription? I mean, if you are a Brit watching this and feeling absolutely despondent, and I know so many of us are, about the direction of our country. What is the solution? How can Britain be saved?
So the only way, in my view, this is going to sound ridiculous perhaps, but the only way Britain can be saved is to return to office in power a government formed of people who have the same values as Reform UK. In other words, return Reform UK into government. If Reform UK forms a government, it'll then be able to get out of the European Court of Human Rights, abolish DEI, and make sure that everyone is treated as being equal and that there's no inequality in society, no matter what color your skin is, and so on. Be proud of the United Kingdom, teach our history accurately and in context. Yeah, sure, we did some stuff in the past we're not proud of, but actually, on the whole, we were the best power, the best empire that ever existed on the face of the earth, and spread huge amounts of prosperity. Do all these things. If reform comes to power, our principal, I think, effort will be in repealing loads and loads of laws and regulations that have been made to dumb down that which is the United Kingdom. So it'll be a matter of repealing. Most governments don't repeal. They just pass more and more laws. They try and patch up a bad law by passing another law. And, you get law upon law upon law, and you just, make everything worse. We just repeal, repeal, repeal. And I often say to people, if you want a legislative agenda, if you can't think of what a legislative agenda you should have, and you want one, look at everything Tony Blair did and repeal it. You might make a few mistakes, but on the whole, your country will end up basically in a good place.
Absolutely fascinating. I think, Ben, a lot of people will be happy with your answer there, because I think one thing that I've really picked up in all of the outrage over you losing the job as Reform UK deputy leader is that folk are worried about a divided Reform UK movement. They feel like they still want you in the tent. And one of the problems in the past, of course, has been so many splits on the right. So you're still talking about Reform UK as a collective. You're still saying you're part of it. You're still saying we. So that gives people some hope that actually there is a way forward for you in the party, potentially.
Look, I mean, I never left the party, and without wishing to bang my own drum, it was Richard Tice and me that spearheaded the effort to get the party from 6% in the polls, which is where it was when I joined, to 16% before the general election.
You did a brilliant job.
Yeah, we did a really good job, actually. And I'm going to go on fighting for that cause. My only criticism, and it's a constructive criticism, and one that I have made publicly, but it's something that I felt was necessary, was that Reform UK needs to democratize. You can't form a government in 2029 with a political party controlled by one individual. As much as I love Nigel, you just simply can't do it. How can you have a government owned by one guy? It doesn't make any sense, right? So we've got to democratize. We've got to get on with it now. We've got to get those structures in place now. It'll take years to bed down those new structures, to get a genuinely grown-up political party fit to govern. So we've got to get on with it full speed. And that's the only pressure I'm bringing on Reform UK, is to democratize and get on with it. I don't care, and I swear I mean this, I've said this, repeat, I never wanted to be deputy leader. When Richard asked me to be deputy leader, I took 3 or 4 weeks over making my decision. And I'm very happy to be the bog cleaner, as long as I get an opportunity to champion the values and the policies of Reform UK, and as long as those policies and values stay with what I believe in, and I can't see how they're going to change. So I'm a big proponent of Reform UK. I'm also very pleased. Slight digression, Dan, but today Jim Allister, who is leader of the TUV and was returned to Parliament as well alongside Reform UK MPs, has agreed to take Reform UK's whip in all matters associated with the alliance that we have with Reform UK. And I am utterly delighted by that. It sends a number of signals to me. The first is that Nigel and the leadership still believe in the alliance with the TUV, which means that we will be fighting for the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And we cannot be a country if we don't fight for a significant territorial part of our country. I know that sounds absurd to have to say it, but that is true. So we're going to make the fight for the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in the Commons. And the second thing that makes me really pleased about that is that we will be the biggest voice for unionism in the Commons, bigger than the Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland. And the Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland, who are a bit like the Tories, they talk all the right things but do all the wrong things, if you don't mind me saying so, they will have to now man up and be proper unionists. So instead of all the accusations being made before the election that, oh, you're going to split the unionist vote in Northern Ireland if TUV stand, actually we're going to emerge from that election with a much, much stronger voice for the union in Parliament. And that is critical. What are we if we are not the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? That is the United Kingdom.
But I think a lot of people will pick up on your words where you've said you still love Nigel. So that's positive. Of course.
Give him a kiss and a cuddle if he walks into the room.
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please do subscribe if you want lots more clips and interviews like that. Plus, if you want to watch our totally uncensored after show, then visit www.outspoken.live.